No mai piki mai e na iwi e na reo na mana tēnā rā koutou katoa. Morena koutou, ngā mihi mahana ki a koutou. Welcome to our first webinar this morning. It's the privilege on behalf of Te Rauora to be hosting a series of webinars that will be profiling the Māori COVID-19 Māori response. This morning we have the privilege of two Māori organisations based in Te Tai Tukaro, two of six that provided their perspectives as Māori self-governing whole organisations in their response to the COVID-19 pandemic in the first wave in the beginning of 2020. For people who don't know the beautiful Te Tai Tukaro, it's the northern region of the North Island of Aotearoa and resident to just under 200,000 people, which over a quarter of those are Māori. We're a rich region with a number of wonderful iwi, Ngāti Kuri, Te Aupōuri, Mai Takoto, Ngāti Kahu, Te Rarawa, Ngāpui, Ngāti Hine, Ngāti Wai, Te Roroa and Ngāti Whātua. The current state of Māori health in Te Tai Tukaro is one of challenges, but in terms of the strengths that we've seen in regards to the Māori response to COVID-19, required to have leadership by Māori for Māori to ensure the needs of its population were prioritised during this challenging time. And in fact, if it wasn't for self-governing Hauora Māori organisations in Te Tai Tukaro, the regional outcome to the pandemic could well have been catastrophic. So an invitation was sought among Māori organisations to share their experiences from the responses to COVID, and we were able as Te Rauora to capture the insights of six Te Tai Tukaro Māori organisations, and this kōrero is built on their experiences. The six organisations are Whakawhiti Ora Pai, Te Hiku Hauora, Ngāti Hine Health Trust, Te Hauora o Ngāpui, Te Ona Ngāti Wai and Te Hāoranga. This morning you will hear presentations from Te Hiku Hauora and Ngāpui. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora koutou, I'll just get the next presentation out. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Puhi ki tuku maunga, ko Wairaharo tuku awa, ko Taukei tuku moana, ko Mamaru tuku waka, ko Ngāti Kahi tuku iwi, ko Whānau moana tuku hapu, ko Taukei Beach Ahau, ko Joe Erich tuku ingoa. Kia ora, I am the Whakapiri Ora Manager at Te Hiku Hauora. So thank you for having me today. Thank you, Maria, for asking us to present how COVID-19 affected us here at Te Hiku Hauora. So in late February of this year, Te Hiku Hauora actually amalgamated our outreach services to Whakapiri Ora so that we were one team. So Whakapiri Ora meaning the bringing together of services and supports to our community. So it actually timed in really well for COVID-19. It wasn't part of the plan, but it worked out really well. So after working all weekend prior to the 23rd of March, we hadn't done a lot of preparation in terms of exactly how we were going to roll out for COVID-19. But on Monday morning when we had our team hui, we actually cancelled all our normal team hui and just did complete preparing for what if COVID-19 hit. So what did we need? Who can do what within the team? Who were going to be our priority whānau that we needed to support? And how were we going to make all of that happen? It timed in really well because at 1 PM that day was when the government announced that we were going into level 3 and was soon to be put into level 4. So it was all hands to deck, and our team of close to 40 was then reduced down to 12 because we had 3 hapu mama on board our team, so they all had to go home. We had kaimahi with health issues, which meant they couldn't be here with us. And we had some kaimahi who were still in self-isolation because they'd been visiting the whānau overseas. So there were lots of whiteboards around the place, and our key priorities that we identified were kaumātua, our hapu and new mama, whānau that were large whānau, and whānau who were suffering already with mental health issues who were possibly being isolated already. So from there we put into an action plan for each of those groups, and we developed this kind of flow chart. So we looked at all our high risk whānau, we had an 0800 number in place, and we developed a caring caller system. So we're lucky enough to have a GP clinic here, so we were able to pull kind of everyone's records and identify our kaumātua, people who just had babies, people who are through our social services. And from there, we actively, proactively run people. And so we had a team working on that proactive phone calls. And from there, they were doing like a basic triage. So we could determine if they needed something clinical, we transferred them through to our clinical nurses who were on phone triage. Who could then ascertain if they needed a home visit. And so we had a team of nurses who were ready to home visit. If they just needed some over the phone support, especially around stress and anxiety, we had a mental health wellness nurse who was able to do that. Our caring callers also kind of identified if there are any social and wellbeing concerns. And from there, we were able to put them through to the Kaifina who stepped up and said we're going to be part of the whānau support team and looked at whether it was complex needs and we need to access things like whānau direct, or if it was just around deliveries, like they were struggling to get their groceries, getting their medication dropped off, things like that. So that's how we initially divided the team. And we also so the Wednesday before we went into level 4, we did panic buying, which was a little bit different to everyone else's panic buying. So I went into the $2 shops and I bought all of the playing cards, the balls, the colouring pencils, the books, everything we could kind of get our hands on. We also did big orders for hygiene products, and from that we were able to make our kaumātua hygiene packs. With plasters and tissues, some PPE stuff for them, cleaners, soaps, all sorts of stuff. We also made a little kaumātua pānui because many of them were ringing us saying, how am I going to cope without the Northland age? So one of our kaifini here developed a little pānui which she printed off, which included, you know, how they could access our services, what was happening out in the community, along with some crosswords and colouring in pictures and things like that. The whānau hygiene boxes came from the Whānau Water Commissioning Agency, so we delivered just over 700 kaumātua packs for our registered kaumātua in the Tahipi region. The Whānau hygiene packs, which came from Whānau Water Protective Agency, nearly 1,000 of them went out. We put together rangatahi packs, which was really how we were going to support our rangatahi who would normally engage in our adolescent services, just some mindfulness activities, how they could connect with us, how they could connect with others, support through schooling, things like that. Our tamariki packs were set up with some little learning activities, some playing cards, knuckle bones, stress balls for parents, that sort of stuff. We also put together some wellness packs. So it was around having journals in there, having little mindfulness activities, and again, all those key contact numbers of what services were available and how to access them. We also ended up with doing a lot of pharmacy deliveries because whānau didn't want to have to break their bubble. So we were, because we have a pharmacy on site here, and we were able just to make sure everyone was getting the prescriptions that they needed. We were also blessed that a lady who was living away rang us up and said, I've got an orchard full of feed jars, please go and pick them. So everyone who got a pack also ended up with boxes of feed jars, and there was also the odd fish or two which appeared on our doorstep, which we were able to share around. And then in late April, we had our first positive COVID case here in Whenua, and in under 24 hours we were out mobile testing. So we split our small team again, and some went out on the road mobile testing while the rest of us carried on back here, doing everything we've been doing from here with deliveries and supporting farmers from here. So each day our mobile testing team was out on the road in different rural locations, and we also offered flu vaccines and health checks for any farmer who didn't feel comfortable to access GP or hospital services during that time. We swabbed over 500 people in the first month, and yeah, it was a really great experience to be able to go out, and great collaboration between all the other Māori providers in the area as we kind of worked out who could cover what areas, so no pockets were left unswabbed. So this is just some photos of some of the team out and about, with lots of good laughs, and really helped kind of cement us as a team. So I guess the important part that we kind of came away with is making sure that we've learnt something and how we're going to apply it. So the main thing that we learnt is that we as Māori providers, we know and understand our community, and we're able to support them. Because all our normal funders kind of said to just go to COVID-19 response, we weren't worried about contractual constraints and making sure we ticked all the right boxes based on contract specifications. We just responded to whānau needs, and that is probably the biggest learning, that if we take away from contractual constraints, we can actually deliver the right, comprehensive, appropriate service for our whānau. And the main thing for us as a team, we learned by playing to our individual strengths, because we all have lots of different individual strengths, that we were much stronger as a team. I really wanted to acknowledge the kaimahi who put themselves on that front line and moved through. It was an amazing experience. It was tiring and weary, but it was a really positive thing. And without them, none of this would have happened. But also the support of our whānau that were at home. So all of us in our team who were here still had young children. So if it hadn't been for partners and wider whānau supporting them, we couldn't have been here. So I think it's really important that not only do we acknowledge the kaimahi who worked frontline, but the people behind the scenes who supported them to do so. So from what we learnt, we kind of made the decision that we're going to keep some staff. So we've worked through to ensure that we can deliver our services regardless of what level we're in. I don't believe that COVID's something that's just going away at the end of this year, so it's really important that we've got plans and processes in place, so regardless of what level we're in, we can continue to deliver our community outreach services to whānau in fluid and flexible ways. We're continually adapting and modifying as things happen, and it's really brought together true team collaboration. And the one thing we'll agree on is that whatever happens, our whānau need to come first. So contract specifications are not the priority, whānau are the priority at all times. So I just wanted to leave you with this whakatauki today. Me mahi tahi tātou, mō te oranga o te katoa. So we should all work together for the well-being of everyone.
Amen. Ora tāu, kia ora koutou. Wonderful. Now we're going to be going down to Ngāpuhi to Tia, Ashby. Kia ora, Tia.
Kia ora. Kia ora koutou, and whoever's watching, I'm just going to share my slide. ka pai. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko tia Ashby tōku ingoa. E tātai ana hau ki ngā iwi o Te Rarawa, Ngāpuhi me Te Atiawa. Thank you, Maria, for inviting me onto the show to explain our COVID-19 strategy and response for Te Hauora o Ngāpuhi. It's, can't see everyone, but we'll proceed through. So today, I guess this is my perspective on the Hauora response for Ngāpuhi, and what I'll be covering is just an overview of our strategy, how it came together, some of the statistics from the first wave and the highlights, and I guess what I would like to get across is the point of difference that we had to the national systems that they had in place in response to COVID-19, our challenges and some of the solutions that we use to overcome some of those challenges, and what our plans are for the future. So all the people in the pictures to the side there comprise the team that helped to put together the strategy and also help to lead various aspects of our response. So I guess, first of all, this quote here from Professor Paparangi Reid pretty much summarises why we responded. So as you can see, we are still operating under the fallacy that a one-size-fits-all, a national program, while necessary, will lead to exacerbated health inequities. While things are being done for the general population, they don't have an equity lens, which is essential from the beginning. And this is pretty much why we had to respond. They did have, you know, globally, the pandemic spread across the country at a rapid rate, at an alarming rate, and systems were in place, but we felt the rural areas, Māori providers, and those that don't have access to a lot of the technology that was disseminating the information, you know, they weren't receiving it. So we knew we had to get in and do something. And that's how, you know, the rōpū came together. Dr. Marie Stewart was one of the core leads in this response as well. And so there were 7 members in the team. Well, actually, there was a lot that were added to the team, but the 7 core team members had, you know, came from diverse backgrounds. They some were had experience in logistics, others in the medical, social and health fields. We also had some within the team that, you know, were just people from the community, what we call community champions. And we got together and we're like, okay, what are we going to do for the people in the area? Not only for Ngāpuhi, but for Te Tai Tokero. We knew we had to protect our taonga, and it was imperative that we could draw on the strengths from different providers, from the DHB, from the various iwi within the rohe, to ensure that we could have efficiency in the utilisation of resources, to ensure that we could collaborate, because Te Aroa Ngāpuhi at the time didn't have a GP practice, so we had to beg, borrow and steal what we could and establish what we could. And that led to the establishment. So from the strategy, we put together a CBAC, which is a community-based assessment clinic, and that was to, and we had border controls in place. And the aim was just to support, inform and protect whānau from the serious and long-term impacts of what COVID-19 could bring, and also to promote well-being for whānau, both now and after the pandemic. And there we go, I'll just quickly change to here. So the 4 pou that I guess guided our response, the overarching themes was kaitiaki, aroha, hihiko and whanaungatanga. And kaitiaki was about, you know, it's guardianship. So that was about ensuring we could establish border controls, that we could ensure messages got out to whānau, hapu, the iwi, and to protect our whānau against COVID-19. Aroha is about providing dignified, high quality care that's evidence-based and to support those in the community. Hihiko was all about mobilising the kaimahi to conduct the testing, contact tracing, and to provide holistic health support. In particular, you know, the social supports, because it was necessary. Whanaungatanga, and that was all about collaboration and coordination through various iwi, Māori health providers. I guess on a daily basis, we were communicating on various forums. You had a crisis management team meeting, you had also IMT meetings, which is, it could be daily or weekly. I think during that time I was on at least 7 to 8 Zooms a day, Zooies we call them. And this is some of the stats from our first wave. So during the first wave, we had 1,228 that were triaged and 628 were tested. And of this number, 50% of the whānau were classified in the taonga category, so those that were most vulnerable to the disease, our kuia, kaumātua and pepe. Oh, I've clicked too far, it's my picture. And also the whānau order aspect, which was the distribution of kai and hygiene packs to whānau that were in need. Because at our community-based assessment clinic, it was a drive-through approach, but before they got into the drive-through section, we had whānau order teams at the front that were asking whānau if they needed any assistance with kai, water, because at the time there's also a drought. So not only were we trying to fend off this, what we call taniwha, invisible ngangara, we also had a drought, COVID, and not so long after, actually, they had a flood. So there were, you know, coupled with whānau that are already experiencing job loss, or were living in low socioeconomic areas, or already experienced barriers to access to care. So I'll just move this across. And I guess our point of difference that I found compared to mainstream services is that we had that, you know, holistic look on health with the inclusion of the taha wairua, taha hinengaro, and we also had mobile and virtual outreach. So immediate whānau needs were met at the time. That was through the use of our whānau order navigators, mobile outreach, and that's pretty much to democratise healthcare to the services, because there were many kuia and kaumātua that were stuck at home, or those that had no vehicles or no pūtea to get into our CBAC, so we had to go to them. We also had, you know, the ability for our kuia and kaumātua that are employed with the organisation to ring and check on other kuia and kaumātua, and could kōrero in te reo Māori, which was, you know, just providing reassurance to them all. And also looking at sustainable resources for whānau, because although we didn't have a lot of funding to give out, what we did have was we were able to redistribute kai. So those that had gardens, or those that had orchards, we were or those that were in partnership with us, we were able to redistribute that kai to whānau. Okay, so what were some of our challenges? So some of the challenges, I guess, has been occurring for decades, but it was very evident, you know, during the first wave, was the institutional racism that some of us faced, you know, because we'd come up with these solutions to some of the challenges that we had, and you get the old response of, oh, you can't do that, it's not evidence-based. And also funding, although funding wasn't a driver, our core driver was to just get on and do the job and keep COVID from impacting our vulnerable communities, it would have helped earlier than what it did. I think it came in months later as opposed to some other places that got it on the spot. So inadequate resources, also lack of transparency of supply chains. So we had issues with some of the PPE getting there, but I guess Tova, you'll see some of the solutions soon. Initially we said, okay, we're going to do this, we need that, but because we weren't getting answers, we had to come up with our own. And also the rural health workforce development was a whittle for us. So what were some of the solutions? So some of the solutions we found during this time was, teaching whānau to grow their own kai, also to train and sustain our pandemic response teams. To what we also did was we utilised the skills of people within the team to get their own connections to supply chains for PPE and for the swabs. And we also use the Whanaunga hotline so to ensure that we could capture all the data. And so what are we doing now? I guess our focus for Te Aroha Ngāpuhi now is we're focusing on whānau resilience, the socio-economic well-being for whānau. So that's the creation of employment opportunities, new job opportunities, and sustainable housing. We're also trying to continue the momentum of creating a learning organisation, because that's what we found was during COVID, everyone had to remain flexible and adaptable because there was a lot of uncertainty about how long this pandemic's going to last. Looking at it now, it could be years before the economy's back to normal. But at the same time, we've got a lot of whānau that are experiencing, experiencing hardship from job loss, the inability to provide for whānau, and, coupled with poverty and the inability to get children in and out of school, particularly in Auckland, is why we need to keep the momentum of continuously learning and bringing in new opportunities for whānau. I guess that's overall, I guess none of this would have been possible. Our response to COVID wouldn't have been possible without the support of all the providers, for example, Mahitahi, the DHB, our team, which is, Toropupoa. We had strong leadership from Toropupoa, Meremangu, Dr. Marie Stewart. We also had Hirini Tau that set the scene for the strategy. Collaboration with HPA, Papatuanuku, and the rest of our team and the frontline staff, everyone. Just like to say thank them all if they're listening. So kia ora koutou.
Kia ora tia.
That's all right.
Oh, kia ora koroa. Thank you very much for to Joe and to Tia for sharing your insights from your respective organisations. I was wondering if you would mind asking just a couple of responses to some questions. One of the things I think that you both mentioned was the ability not just to be agile, but to also to put aside some of the contractual situations, or putting contracts aside and responding to community. And so what did funders do to enable that, and has that continued in post wave one of the COVID? What's the relationships been with the funders since the first wave?
Would you like to ask first?
Sure. So I think the important part is in wave one, we were told COVID-19 response is the priority. So that kind of meant that we were completely free. Since wave one, however, though, kind of as we moved down the levels and kind of got to level 3, 2, it was like it slowly came in where business as usual needs to continue to happen. In some ways, that's been harder because now we're still trying to do all the business as usual stuff as well as the COVID-19 response. So things like tummy for the well child checks still need to happen. Stop smoking services still need to happen. But also we know that whānau are needing more than just what they needed prior to COVID. So I think that's been a bigger challenge. And also, for our outreach clinics and that, when we're at like level 2, it's trying to manage that and, like I talked about, so ensuring that our services can continue regardless of what level we're in. So we're kind of having to adapt to that, and that can be sometimes can be quite fearful for whānau, especially when you're coming in for a well child core check visit with their baby, and we've got to send in nurses in full PPE, not just for our nurses' sake, but also to protect that whānau, because those nurses in a couple of days might be back out on a COVID-19 swabbing station. So while all best practices are taking place, it's not normal for whānau to have a tummy full of nurse arrive in full PPE. That's what we've got to do to protect our whānau.
What are your thoughts, Tia? What have the situation been for yourself?
Yeah, for ourselves, I guess this our relationship with funders has been good. However, it could be better. Some of the challenges, that I identified, we put forward to them, and we're seeing a lot more transparency now and faster response time. But I guess a challenge for the government and for the mainstream funders is how long they can sustain this, because and it's about, that's I guess part of the main reason why we're coming up with our own solutions to find our own way to sustain some of the longer term initiatives, because they have worked, but whether or not it can fit in the budget's is another question to ask, because I guess they've got to weigh up what some of the priorities are on a global or national scale. But that's my whakaaro, is that it has improved, and there are some opportunities in the pipeline, but whether or not it's going to last, because they're looking at 2022 to 10 years, that this, the effects may continue from this pandemic. So it's going to be interesting to see what planning is occurring now to try and address some of those longer whānau resilience initiatives. Longer term impacts would be, I guess, a focus that they may need to address with Treasury. That's my whakaaro.
Kia ora, Joe. I think, given the conversations, what I gather from your korero is that we don't have a vaccine in New Zealand. We're not going to have a vaccine potentially in New Zealand for maybe another year or two, which means that COVID and any other infectious disease is going to be a constant additional matter that we need to consider in providing primary care services, in which you're doing comprehensively in your communities. In your communities that have vulnerabilities already and inequities, which means that actually a point and a korero that needs to go to the funders that fund you should be an additional equity payment to actually support you to raise the response that's required in terms of COVID constantly being in our environment and in our world now, in addition to any other future infectious disease threats that might actually also turn up in Aotearoa. So I think part of that is that it's great that the relationships have seen some movement, some agility, some support of yourselves and your Māori organisations, but actually it requires additional resource, more funding. The other thing too I'm curious about, and both of you talked about your workforce, and the ability to be agile, to be mobile, to be supportive, to be flexible, and to suddenly be appropriate to be placed into situations in response to what the level restrictions are, or if there's noted about a COVID case within the community. What sort of support, what would you make, if you were to make a recommendation to funders about your workforce, be it workforce development, be it additional pay parity, what would you ask if you had, if you were given by the funder an opportunity in saying, what do you need for your workforce? What would your response be?
Yeah, I think it's definitely around the pay parity. I also think it's around sustainability, because, you know, there's a lot of, we'll do this, but we're on 1 year, 2 year contracts, and, you know, we know that we're looking long term, so actually we need to be pushed out to 5, 10 year contracts. It's really hard to put anything sustainable in when the goalposts are moving every year. So I think that's part of, you know, sustainability to contracts. And the workforce training at all levels, yes, for our clinical staff, but also for our kaimahina working in that social space, that, you know, our kaiwhina, because those are the people that have that direct, close relationship with our whānau and our community. And so really making sure that they're well supported in terms of training, and also that debrief space. So one of the things we had was a 3-4 o'clock debrief every day. And that's really, you know, the whole whanaungatanga of where everyone's at, how everyone's going. It's really important for all of our kaimahina, because there's still people too, you know, and that's what a lot of, you know, funders forget, that actually it's not just FTE we're putting out there. These are whānau with their own whānau at home, their own they need to work through as well.
Okay. Tim, your thoughts?
Yeah, for me, so if we got the opportunity for that funding, I guess it'll be to train and sustain our pandemic response teams, so that, I guess a key learning from this is that we weren't prepared initially, you know, as a country really. And well, there was something back in 2014-15, but I guess what we've learned and what we've got now, they should train and sustain that team. So even if it's maybe once a year or twice a year, they're meeting up with the civil defence force, etc., like that, you know, having a national response team that's coordinated out into the regions. Also, we'd want to have funding available to focus more on mental health, developing mental health initiatives, because we don't have many, particularly for alcohol and drug addiction, because while COVID was going on, we had a hidden pandemic, I guess, or hidden disease, which is affecting a lot of our communities in Te Tai Tokerau, which is to combat methamphetamine addictions and the ramifications or implications on whānau from that. Also, yeah, definitely pay parity. So if you're going to give contracts, ensure that it's enough to that, you know, enough so that we're able to do a good job and that we can recruit talent, because it is hard to try and incentivize. You know, you could say, we're part of your whānau, come home, but in reality they need to provide for their own whānau, so naturally they may want to go to where they're getting paid more, which is, I guess, it shouldn't be like that. If you're doing the same job across the country, they should be able to get the same pay. But that's it from me. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Tia. And I guess we also saw just recently in the media about Dr. Heather Kane-Fryer and her work at AET, which actually acknowledged this huge difference between Māori and Pacifica leadership in terms of their pay parity with other leaders within the health system. Huge difference in pay. But we know that the additional expectations, particularly upon our Māori workforce, because of the expectations that they had within their community and their whānau, as well as their work, does increase the level of challenges and stress at times. Just a couple of things. One of the great things in Te Tai Tukurau was the iwi leadership. We saw through, particularly beginning of the year, the border controls across Rotorua. And we heard from the conversations with yourselves and the other 4 Māori organisations about the iwi investment. Iwi, hapu iwi leadership was extremely active and visible across this rohe, across Te Tai Tukurau. And what we saw was iwi working closely and linking in with yourselves. And we saw checkpoints across the region. We saw that it was particularly clear, and you raised just both of you in terms of protecting our piko mātua, our whānau that are vulnerable in terms of trying to protect them from COVID. But we also saw examples of iwi supplying water to all people in community, not just Māori, in addition to social support and community. How has it been for yourselves in terms of that connection in terms of the local iwi leadership, getting in there to support yourselves with a community health approach? How's it been for you?
Yeah, it's been good. I really enjoyed working with iwi. We're an iwi organisation anyway, so we have representation from all of our iwi within the organisation anyway, at the governance level. But it was really, I found it really good, and it was just, for me, I think the big positive was iwi working together for the good, it wasn't about anyone's, this is my boundary, or this is my, where my line, where I draw the line in the sand, it was just about let's get in and do it. So, yeah, for me, it was a positive feeling.
I'd say the same. What was exciting was I was actually, really excited just to, have that happen. I noticed that as well. I was like, oh my gosh, everyone's, working together. And I guess the benefit of that was we had a greater outreach, so we could ensure that evidence-based messaging and communication was going to the right places. We didn't need to sort of try and find the right person. The chairs would fire it down to the CEs, or the CEs would send it down to the ops team, which made life a lot easier. Also, if we ran out of things, it might be, kia ora cousins or whanaunga over there, Hokianga or Te Rarawa or Ngāti Kahu, we've run out of this. And there was a bit of tātou of resources, which was, great to see. And there's much more that can be done from that relationship, and I can't wait to see where it progresses to.
Lovely. You mentioned actually just one of the call around the communication and the kumara vine. That's really quite a positive attribute amongst Māori organisations like yourselves in terms of seeking out people, sharing information and comms. We heard from different groups like Whakapiti Oropai, for example, and Kia ora Ngāti Wai and others, who talked about the use of Facebook and local community groups actually having little Facebook kind of pages and actually being able to connect into there to connect to other people within community that might not be in mainstream comms or media kind of strategies. When you think about COVID, there was a real push or very public-facing type COVID-19 social advertising, campaigning, and a hell of a lot of emailing and information coming from all ends of the youth, really. How was it for yourselves? What worked for yourselves as Māori organisations in terms of that kumara vine and getting the kōrero out to your communities? What worked?
Yeah, so it was kind of different for us with different areas and different whānau. So yeah, we did a lot of Facebook. And onto the community pages. We did a lot with just emailing different iwi saying that this is what's happening, where it's happening, let us know how that fits with you. But yeah, for our kaumātua, that's where we identified, for them a lot of their communication came via the Northland Age, which is our local paper twice a week. And of course, when you're at level 4, that all stopped. And we had a number of them calling us saying, can you please get me the Northland Age? And we're saying, there is no Northland Age. So that's why we developed our own whānau for that group in particular. So 700 of those were going out on a regular basis because that was their only way and means of communicating. And just little things too for them, like, what's happening with my rubbish pickup and how do I get into here, or, how can I access that, the GPs, or what am I going to do, my scripts, my medications to be picked up. So just little things like that. So it was kind of different for different people. And, we've got a lot of whānau who live in areas where there is no connection. So it did have to be that we had vans driving around dropping off whānau into people's letterboxes because it was the only way to let them know what is happening, where it's happening, when it's happening. Because otherwise we couldn't rely solely on social media.
Yeah, for us, social media, I guess, the dissemination of messages and information was, I guess the best method was through word of mouth, to be honest. Like I said, the Kumara Vine or the whānau hotline, although the correct messaging and would have been through social media. So we had two great comms that members, which were Kay Marie Dunn and Maria Lowe. So what Kay Marie would do, she was part of our team that would ensure that the messages were correct and came direct from the Ministry of Health. But if there were any iwi messages, then she could send that message across Te Kahua Taone, which was 11 iwi, and she could send the information out to whānau. So I guess it would depend on, it was dependent on the age group. So social media worked for the 20 to 40 year age group. Word of mouth was better for kuia kaumātua because they may not have had technology. And then for the young ones, it was in the whānau that didn't have access to, TV, to social media, etc. It was definitely word of mouth. And that's where we saw most of the numbers actually come through the CBAC, was through word of mouth. So that would be one of our best ways that we're using for promotion. They had the radio, but definitely the 0800 or texting. So I guess another key benefit to social media was Messenger. Facebook Messenger was a good way. So if we couldn't find a whānau member, we'd say, how can we get a hold of this person? And they'd sort of go through Messenger and we'll finally get a hold of them. And that helped with contact, the contact tracing. There were some people within the public health system that couldn't get whānau that lived off the grid, and that was the best method.
All right, there's a couple of questions in the Q&A, and I'm hoping that the participant that put forward, is there anything you would have done differently? Is there anything that you would have done differently?
It's really hard to say that because it did evolve really fast. So, it's hard to say. There is little things, like I know, like we had the initial shortage of PPE. I put the order in and it just took weeks to get here. So once we got those systems up and running, it was really good. We possibly would have gone out swabbing a bit earlier. I don't know if it's so much, when I reflect on it, how fast everything really did evolve. I think just if we maybe possibly built stronger relationships with our community sooner, but it happened anyway, just at a really fast pace, and it went out.
I guess for us, what we would have done here, well, in hindsight, what we would have done differently would have been to involve, the police, Māori police liaison teams, and maybe traffic management teams, involve them in the planning from the start, because, there's an opportunity there with the likes of Fulton Hogan in the north, or you know, with that workforce that wasn't employed at the time, could have been redeployed to assist with setting up testing stations, with ensuring there was adequate managed traffic flow, and that you know, it was updated regularly on the highway sites, etc. And also with the police, not so much having to help diffuse family violence situations from our level, but just having that communication with them, especially when it came to managing tangihanga, having guidelines, or perhaps a representative that was there solely for that job, because that was the biggest one, well, not the biggest, just one of the other challenges that I actually forgot to put on there, was managing whānau that were dealing with, I guess, stress and grief, having a whānau member pass away, and then having to, I guess, adhere to guidelines. There was a bit of a balance there that we had to take.
There's a question here with their thoughts about how to support Whakarehere whānau. It's an interesting question actually, because a lot of whānau ended up coming back from Auckland and different places. For Kia ora Ngāti Wai, for example, they did mention about a number of whānau coming back to their batches. And the reality is that the Māori organisations focused on their community, whoever was living in those communities, Māori and non-Māori. These communities are really strong. The rurality and the relationships and the connectivity across many areas. If we think of where we're currently talking to you from, in Kaitaia, we have a large Ara Ra or Dalmatian whānau. So there's lots of different pockets within the community that have been here for generations and are part of this community. So the Māori organisations responded by looking after everybody within their patches and working across the different groups that were doing things. We heard stories, for example, in the very far north, where they had a checkpoint there and were supplying water to everybody that had a drought. So there were lots of different opportunities. People, as you heard, from dropping off kai that was being distributed, redistributed, you know, from orchards and fishery and places like that, were actually spread out amongst the community. There's another question here about whānau violence. There's a really cool kaupapa up here called Te Whiria Te Muka. And quite early on, they put out a response to different groups to see if there was additional accommodation to assist some of our whānau that were definitely more vulnerable or at risk of violence at home. And what ended up happening is that all the organisations came together to be able to support each other and share the whakaaro and continue to provide some sort of psychosocial support and other sorts of support to enable either people to get out of those sort of situations if it was risky, and to ensure that mama and whānau were safe. So there were a lot of different strategies occurring, which I think potentially demonstrate the agility of all groups actually coming together. And just lastly, yeah, well, we've just come through another wave. And we've heard that the organisations are continuing to be vigilant about having COVID-19 within the space. But if you were just to leave with a final word about preparation, what needs to happen going forward?
Yeah, I think that's the important part, is that people are prepared for another way. I keep hearing whānau say, oh, you know, after this year we're going to be fine. There is no guarantees with COVID. We don't know when the end point is. There may not be an end point. As you said there, we may be waiting a year or longer for a vaccine. So I think that's the important part, that we all stay vigilant, we all stay prepared, because that's certainly what we're doing in the health sector view. And I think it's just really important that we bear that in mind, that there is no end date for this. It's not. I wish it was ending on the 31st of December, but we just can't guarantee it.
Yeah, and the final note from me is just to remain vigilant and adaptable, and I guess work on some home initiatives, because it is correct, we don't know how long this is going to be. And I bet as soon as they open up that travel opportunity to the Cook Islands, flights are going to be booked out well in advance. So yeah, just, and I go, yeah, be prepared and just remain vigilant would be my key point to get across. Kia ora.
Well, kia ora kōrua. It's been a pleasure to have you this morning share your insights, and just for the rest of the whānau, we're actually recording this, so this resource will be available. And just sort of to conclude from our end, it's our perspective that the rangatiratanga of Māori into Te Tukara was key to the regional response to COVID-19 and the successful prevention of Māori deaths from coronavirus in this area. We believe that the self-governing Māori organisations are resilient and adaptable governing institutions, and that their knowledge and expertise show their logistical coordination of a kaupapa Māori public health approach in a region that could have fared worse than it did, given its social and health issues. Whānau, we are being really privileged and want to acknowledge all the 6 providers in contributing to this kōrero as well. There will be an article, this will be one of a number of different articles and insights that will compile a publication that will be available next month. Those publications will help to profile and highlight the Māori organisations across Aotearoa. We're starting here today, and typically, I suppose, in terms of my own tupuna, would say that's the right thing to do, because it started at the tail of the fish. It makes the head of the fish work, and everything moves down. But if we think about some of the kōrero from here in terms of the providers, the health and social service providers that are doing the making here in the community, we've had a long whakapapa, a long commitment to this community and enabling its well-being and addressing the inequities that some of our people are experiencing. So, ngā mihi mahi kia purua, ngā wahine mā, ngā rangatira e jau me tia, ngā mihi kia purua. Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom. For people that wish to reach out to them, I'm sure that those contacts could be made available. If there are further questions that we haven't answered, we can do so at another time. Other than that, kia ora koutou and ngā mihi mahana kia koutou. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we look forward to tuning in the next time, which is next week for our next COVID-19 webinar. Kia ora koutou.